If you picture a medieval monk, you probably imagine a hooded figure shuffling silently through a cloister, head bowed, muttering prayers. And you wouldn't be wrong. But the reality of monastic life was far stranger, and at times much funnier, than the solemn stereotype. For one thing, monks lived by rules about when to eat, when to sleep, when to pray, even when to keep absolutely quiet. Silence was considered holy, but practical too. If you couldn't talk, you had to invent ways of communicating. So monks developed a whole system of hand signals. Want bread at dinner? One gesture. Fish? Another. Want wine? Well, you could imagine that one became very popular indeed. Meals themselves were a curious business. Monks were meant to eat plainly, to show humility. But plain didn't always mean miserable. In fact, monasteries often had access to better food than the peasants outside their walls. They grew herbs, brewed beer, and made cheese. Still, rules insisted that meat from four-legged animals was forbidden in many orders. Fish, however, did not count as meat, which meant that Fridays and Lent and Advent and almost half the year were filled with creative fish dishes. And if you think monks always obeyed those rules, let's just say that some monastic kitchens became very skilled at bending definitions. Beaver's tail? Technically eaten in water, so fish. Problem solved. The timetable of a monk's day was ruled by the bells. 7 times a day, no matter the weather, no matter the season, the community gathered to chant the divine office. At midnight, at dawn, mid-morning, midday, afternoon, evening, and night. Sleep was fragmented, and the rhythm of prayer relentless. For us, it would feel exhausting. But for monks, this constant cycle of chant and silence was thought to align them with heaven's order. Not that every monk was perfect. Far from it. Records from monasteries reveal all sorts of lapses. Monks who overslept and missed prayers, monks caught talking when they shouldn't, even monks caught sneaking food. The punishments could be harsh, or downright bizarre. One offender might be ordered to eat on the floor rather than at the table. Another might be forced to stand outside the refectory door while his brothers dined. Imagine the shame of smelling roast fish stew but not being allowed a bite. And then there was laughter. Officially discouraged since it distracted from spiritual seriousness. Yet humans will be humans. Chronicles complain of monks chuckling at inappropriate moments or telling jokes in the cloister. And in one famous case, a monk's uncontrollable laughter during prayers was taken as proof of demonic possession. Perhaps it was, but perhaps he'd just heard something funny. Monks were also bound by obedience, chastity, and poverty, which didn't always work out as planned. Some monasteries became fabulously wealthy, thanks to land donations and pilgrims dropping coins at their shrines. The irony wasn't lost on outsiders. What began as a vow of poverty could end up in a life of relative comfort, though never without those relentless bells. Their appearance too was regulated. The classic monk haircut, the tonsure, left a ring of hair around a bald crown. To medieval minds, it symbolized humility. To modern eyes, it looks suspiciously like the world's worst bowl cut. Rules dictated it be trimmed regularly. So if you ever thought monks looked alike, it was intentional. And yet behind the rules and rituals, monks accomplished extraordinary things. They copied and preserved manuscripts, keeping ancient knowledge alive when much of Europe had forgotten it. They experimented with farming, brewing, medicine, and architecture. Monasteries became safe havens for travelers, hospitals for the sick, and schools for the young. These strange, rule-bound men, living in cloistered communities, were the beating heart of medieval intellectual life. So yes, monks lived strangely. They signaled silently for food, shaved their heads in peculiar ways, and kept rigid timetables enforced by bells. They weren't always perfectly obedient, and sometimes they laughed when they shouldn't. But without them, Europe's Middle Ages would look very different indeed. The next time you imagine a monk chanting in the dark, remember he might also be suppressing a grin, longing for roast meat, or flashing a quick hand signal to ask for a second cup of wine. Strange lives, yes, but lives that shaped a civilization.